I just want to welcome everybody to Under the Hood. This is our September version. A little off. We're usually on Tuesdays, but as Mike and I were just talking, we're pretty flexible. So he had a very, very important meeting, and so we're doing it today. And those of you that have registered and they couldn't make it, you will get the replay. So let me tell you a little bit about Under the Hood, and then I'll tell you a little bit about Michael. Under the Hood's premise is that patterns that are created in childhood impact us as grown-ups. And we are always looking at, we have a lot of things that happened in childhood, and we don't need to revisit them all, but many of these patterns that are created impact us in a way that lead to our success, and then sometimes lead to, I don't really call it a failure unless we don't learn something from it, but we sometimes have to pivot and relook at what we're doing. So my background is personal growth, psychotherapist by training, and bringing mastery under pressure to companies, high achieving people who then impact other people. So everybody that I invite on this call is seasoned. A seasoned leader has been through a couple things or two, and Mike is a great example for that. So welcome, and here we go. So Michael, and I'm going to let him tell you most of this, he had two careers. One was in accounting, he's a CPA, and the other in sales. He started his first business when he was 27 years old, called Nicoat. I think that's the way you pronounce it, Mike? Is that the way you pronounce it?
Long Nicoat. I should have told you that. Okay. Yep.
Now an ICP Industrial is a specialty chemical business serving printing and packaging industries worldwide. And then he's got a story here about his early years. And he's also, and this is really important, a professional EOS implementer and a Vistage Chair. What is an EOS implementer, Mike?
EOS Implementer it stands for the Entrepreneurial Operating System. And folks like myself and many, many hundreds around the country implement a simple set of tools, helping businesses scale, grow, easier to manage, make more profits, have more fun for their leadership team. We could talk a little bit more about it in detail later, maybe.
Okay. And so he helps entrepreneurs, business owners, and CEOs and their leadership teams get more of what they want from their business and lead a more balanced life. Okay. So is there anything you want to add to that from the very beginning, Mike?
Say that again.
Is there anything you want to add, or shall I just go into my first question?
Well, I think, we all have a story, and we're going to talk probably a little bit about my background growing up, and I think that's an important part. So I won't get to that yet, but safe to say, I think I underestimated starting a manufacturing business, and Babs was my wife of 43 years and over 50 years dating, my high school sweetheart. She was in graduate school doing a PhD program and started this business, and we lived on credit cards for about 5 years and a second mortgage. And then we turned the corner, and I found a system eventually like EOS before EOS came out with Bruce Breyer, who was a subject matter expert. Title of his talk was The Organized Executive. And that really allowed us to grow the business and have a liquidity event and eventually, try to help people not in the Vistage community and in the EOS community, small, entrepreneurs trying to gain more traction.
Super. Okay. So could you tell us a little bit about your early background, your family of origin?
Sure. Yeah, I grew up down the road, actually. I currently live in a suburb called Glenview. I grew up in Morton Grove on a busy street. I say that intentionally because it was a busy street. It wasn't a 4-lane, 3-bedroom house, 1 bathroom, 4 sisters, 3 brothers. There were 8 of us. Wow. My dad was in the construction business. He was known as a lather, lath and plaster. Tina might know what that is. Some people don't. And there was some really... What emerged from my childhood was, in many respects, as I became a teenager and not knowing it, the kind of wanting to escape the chaos of my upbringing. My mom and dad were loving. They struggled with some bad habits, but what I got to see with them both were two wonderful habits. My mom was a voracious reader. And so when you came into a room, she would put that book down, maybe not the cigarette, and she would give you her full attention. And so she knew how to pay attention. It's a gift that I think not everybody has, and my mom had it. My dad was good tired. It's a term from Harry Chapin, really about, kind of fighting your own battles, living your own days, and loving what you do. And he talks about his grandfather being a painter and loving painting, not worried about being more famous. And so one summer, I got to work with my dad at the end of my freshman year. The company that he worked for as a lather, eventually carpenter, I built scaffolding, and I got to see my dad work. And my dad had one gear. It was a high gear. And at the end of the day, he was good tired, even though I didn't have that term, physically exhausted. But he said, I put in a great day's work, and he took so much pride in it. And I got to see that, right? And when I told him I was leaving accounting and eventually sales and then starting my own business, he goes, Michael, you went to school for this. So he saw that as his apprenticeship that he had. So that was an experience that burned into my heart. I think the other thing I talk about with escaping is a couple of my older siblings had some tough road. Mental health challenges, early pregnancy. My older brother, as I like to joke, and Ricky would handle this, God rest his soul. Ricky never met a drug he didn't want to try. So I think that's where I think God enters, and whether we have a spiritual side or not, something bigger enters and says, maybe you don't want to do that. And I can't say that I did it. Yeah, you think you make choices, but so as I sat in that freshman dorm, sometimes crying about being so fortunate to escape, yes, but to get a scholarship for college to play football and eventually baseball. So from there, and with Barbara, we just, we raised kids and struggled, and we made it and turned the corner. So right now it's about making a difference for other people and continuing still to enjoy life and be tired at the end of every day.
So
Hope that's enough.
No, that's awesome. I'm just going to raise my chair a little bit. So these patterns, okay, are you a reader or is it?
Reader. Yeah, my mom gave us all that gift. My oldest sister, Chris, certainly reads more than me, but I read a lot, as does, I think, all my family.
And where were you again, Mike, in the family?
I'm fifth. So I had three older sisters, Chrissy, Lily, and Val, and then my brother, Ricky, myself, my youngest sister, Mary, and then my two youngest brothers, Bob and Ron, otherwise known as the boys.
So I have three sons, but I always think my middle one, which you were a middle child, I always think he raised himself in a way. There was a lot of attention in a way to the older one and the younger one, and somehow or other, he kind of figured things out a lot on his own, kind of what would work for him, what wouldn't work for him.
Yeah, I can relate to that. I mean, there was great influence of both a positive and maybe a negative nature. And sometimes, which road you goes down, as Robert Frost, I guess for my family, I maybe took the road less traveled. And they've always been supportive. I've lost two siblings and way early. And that's a sad thing no one should have to go to for folks in their 50s and, mid 60s at their age.
Yeah. So let me ask you a different question.
Yes.
What patterns that actually got in your way that you needed to pay attention to, and kind of tell us a little story about, kind of how
patterns that got in my way.
We hear the good news, which is awesome, and that has
Yeah.
your success.
I think a little bit, you have to have enough self-awareness, right? So there's no questions that I have an obsession with maybe cleanliness sometimes.
Okay.
And because my house wasn't always the cleanest, my room, I tried to keep clean because there was just not so much, that wasn't a worry in the house for whatever reason. And so, sometimes something like that serves you, but sometimes it can go to the extreme of Mike, as my oldest daughter named me, with a nickname during the pandemic, Wipey Wiperson, because I like to keep things clean. And sometimes probably to a degree that's unnecessary, or I push it on others, right? Which, you know, I unfortunately, I still do that to my wife, Babs. God bless her. She handles it and just says, why do you care what my closet looks like? And she's right. Yeah, so that's, you know, that's a pattern that, you know, it can serve you, but it can also not serve you, right?
And as you were going through your earlier years, you know,
Yes.
I know some of the business, you know, you were talking on credit cards, you would, again, what were some of the, because part of this program is
Yes.
not exposing in a sense, but sharing that life is just not all, you know,
Hard. Life's hard.
This opportunity for personal growth, because that's kind of what we're all about here. And recognizing the things that do serve you and the ones that don't. And usually sometimes, you know, the ones that don't, they hit us over the heads and we have to kind of take a look. And that's kind of what I'm asking, like what?
Yeah, I think I'm not sure if this fits into the category of that, but when I was 13 years old, I had a hip injury that, you know, I felt like I was running for a touchdown in football, and, you know, I think it was maybe an 8th grader, because I had a late birthday. I was probably turning 14, and I felt like my hip caved in, and I was limping for 3 months. My dad brought me to a chiropractor. They worked on it. And I think that wounding caused me to say that, to really feel that the people around me who love me can't take care of me. So I have to take care of myself. Served me to a point, but my parents did love me, and my siblings loved me. But I think that can serve you only for so long, right? And so that probably was a pattern, I would say, until I was made aware of it, actually by a psychotherapist in a Vistage meeting, with a trigger and kind of going over things that, what happened in your life. And I shared this, one of the probably 3-4 people that shared it. And, you know, I think I created something in my mind that they couldn't take care of me. And I think my dad did the right thing in many respects. You know, it wasn't as if I broke a hip, right? So that's, I think, a pattern that.
So how did it impact your life around you, your work, your
Well,
life?
how did it impact my life? I mean, I think in the end, I just was like, I'm going to do it. I don't know if I need anybody else, right? Ironically, you know, I was captain of the team for football, baseball in high school, captain of the team in college for baseball. So I certainly appeared to know how to be a leader and got into team sports and always played them. But I think there was always this, you know, drive that kind of like, you know, I got to still do it, right? Yeah.
So learning to accept help from others, perhaps.
Correct. Big time. And I think that's where, you know, you come along, patron saints, you come along when the student's ready, the teacher will appear, and just being aware of it. And I think, you know, trying to read all sorts of books. I remember when I first read The Road Less Traveled, and reading about, you know, back then with a psychiatrist, is, you know, Scott Peck was, that you have to do your own therapy, but that life is difficult, but talking about patterns and how they can serve us, and how at certain points in our life, right? And other times they don't. And I think, you know, there was a lot of maybe creating isolation on my part, except with Babs, because we were together we've been together pretty much our whole life since 14, the end of freshman year, which is pretty unusual. We were apart freshman year. So I think it served me to a point, and then at some point it's like, you got to ask for help. And I think I found that when I discovered a weird condition later in life, probably about 10, 11 years ago, called hypercalciuria. And I had some real bone degradation in my lower back, to the point where it was osteoporosis, but not real good in that back area. And I had some fractures that were undiagnosed, which are terribly painful. And I remember leaning over trying to pick up Chapin, our dog's poop, and I couldn't. And it just hit me right there. I looked up and I said, thank you, God, for pointing this out, that you got to still learn to ask for help, even on something like this. And because the physical, but it's the most mental and emotional. When something bizarre happens health-wise, it's not going to kill you, but I was in a pretty dark space for a couple of months, say 11 years ago when I was diagnosed. And, now it's like, look, you got to live your life. Try not to pick up heavy objects from the ground that are maybe, too heavy, and just be mindful of it. And that, because everybody thinks of it as a woman's disease, but I guess that because I'm, I'm influenced by a lot of women in my life, including my wife and sisters and my mom, so, yeah.
So we, again, by your willingness to be perhaps open at some point.
Yes.
And listen to people and listen to the messages that you're getting.
Yes.
Then you were more willing and more able to make those shifts.
Well, I think at that point, it's like, hey, knucklehead, wake up here, right? You're not going to die. And I can tell you that the support I got, certainly from the caregivers, but from my family, certainly my wife, Barbara, who really physically does a lot of the heavy lifting now, right? But it was, I didn't want it to be a defining moment that was negative, but it took a while to get through that.
How did these, again, the good and the things that you had to kind of work on, how did they show up in your business? Obviously you're a leader from day one of it. Some people are just natural leaders. We all, even though those of us who are, perhaps, we still have a lot to learn. But again, I always think about leadership and sort of a natural leader is that you can see what's happening down the road before most other people see it.
Sometimes I think, I take the page out of my mom's book, Paying Attention. Did I always pay attention enough? Right. And, my son had some trauma, significant trauma that we weren't aware of between 7th and 8th grade. And I think I beat myself up quite a bit for missing that. And Connor's forgiven me, and I've forgiven him for whatever it was his responsibility. And I think that it comes to paying attention. And so I think when you're way out there sometimes and you're driving, are you paying attention? Are you getting distracted with shiny objects? And I have that problem sometimes, no question. And because it's doing the things that kind of come easy versus doing the things that are hard that you need to do.
And that also is perhaps the entrepreneur in you, because again, entrepreneurs are visionaries in general. Again,
yes.
We're sort of making a big statement here, but that's that piece of seeing the vision. And sometimes we do get lost in like what's right in front of us.
Yeah. And I think when you get a supportive family and team, it's hard to have a conversation about my life without talking about mom and dad, siblings, my best buddy, Barbara, my kids, Connor, Aaron, Kaylee, and Tay. But I would also be remiss not to mention Manny, who really basically started the business with me. My father-in-law, who suffered depression, was a tough business partner. He did his best and he had perseverance and wanted to really do it. But Manny has been this thread, this holding together everything, this calm. And so, you'd say, if you're going to build your company on somebody from a value standpoint, it was Manny. His mom and dad are immigrants from Mexico, but Manny lived there several times as a kid, came back, been in Chicago now a long time. And Manny would ground me often because I think we need that, especially being visionaries sometimes, where it's just like, you got all these ideas, you're not going to get in the weeds. I didn't like getting in the weeds. I liked solving pain and getting with customers and, but on the other hand, when you got to pay attention enough, and with what Connor went through, we had to pay attention at that point, right? And I think all our kids, my oldest daughter, Benny, was born with ventricular septal defect, Bennett, and it's a hole in the heart. It didn't heal, and he needed heart surgery. But also in perspective, we also know some good friends whose daughter, has had multiple heart surgeries and she needs another one, right? So everything is relative, and I think these experiences make you say grace, be grateful, and also enough self-awareness that you got to learn from these. Because God, if you don't, it's like, well, why do you want to keep repeating the same damn mistakes? But it is hard, Tina, with patterns and how we're wired and whatnot, to break that, and then not to go back to it because it's comfortable.
That's right. And again, you have the perspective to look back.
Yes, I do, because I got some gray hair and not a lot of hair.
It's okay, but I work with a lot of people who are sort of trying to figure it out. And I think what
Yes.
you're saying, and it's so important, this work is not easy. Being alive, being human is not easy.
Right.
And we're born with certain traits, and then we're born into families with certain characteristics.
Yes.
And I like to say that the unconscious by its nature is unconscious.
Hmm. Hmm.
So we
Yes.
do these things, as you said, I didn't pay attention. You weren't doing it purposely.
Right.
You were operating the way that you operate.
Right.
So the whole purpose, honestly, of my purpose of being and my purpose of doing this is to have people appreciate that this is work.
Yes. Yes.
Awareness, self-discipline, all of those things that go into being a successful human being. How many
Yes.
times you talked about your family and your children and the people around you, and they're all part of us.
Yes.
And this work is not easy. And because it's unconscious, we frequently need people to show us things or point things out.
Yep.
Many times we just kind of hit ourselves on the head enough where we say, this is a little crazy. So
yeah, and not everybody has that God-given ability to kind of stop, wait a minute, right? And it's not that I do, but I do think where those moments come from, you have to be talking to somebody, whether we want to call them a therapist, but somebody who's trained, and I've certainly done that. And I think even post-pandemic, I think more and more people are finding that, yes, you need to do that. Could a peer group be that for a point? It was for me, especially when we had to make a serious decision with Connor's junior year, and he went to what's called a wilderness program, an emotional growth program. I mean, if I didn't have the group to talk to about that, and then further other resources, and then finding the resources for your oldest child, right? And, as I said in a TED talk I did a number of years ago, but you know what? June of 1919, Father's Day, Connor graduated with his PhD from Stanford. And, all my kids have carved their way, and nothing was perfect in the Lawson household, right? Everybody's got something or several things. And when we begin to think that they don't, that's okay. But that intimacy that people will be willing to share as males often, it's not easy. It has to be somehow modeled. And I got lucky because my mom and dad were criers in a legitimate way, an authentic way. When I'm 12 years old and I'm watching a John Wayne movie, I think it was Sands of Iwo Jima, and he gets shot in the back and my dad's crying over there. So it was easy for us to cry, which I think is an important, it's an important trait.
it's an important trait. What
Yeah.
I see back a lot, and I think, my father was an athlete and loved sports.
Yes.
And say you could learn everything that you need to learn in life about being on the ball field. Except you need the coach that can transfer the skills
Yes.
in some way, right? Because
Absolutely. Absolutely.
I do that coaches can be the worst thing possible experiences.
No, but you're right. I think that relates to the peripheral of coaches in our life, therapists in our life. Going to George, who was a great influence on me to bring up coaches, he was holding the mental side of hitting for me. He could see I could hit, but and I've watched this now and being such a diehard Cub fan, it's 2-0. You let a pitch go down that I know is your pitch. Why'd you not swing at it? Were you not ready? Were you thinking curveball? Hey, so I mean, I think you're exactly right. If we don't have that pointed out, And those are mentors. Those are folks that along the way have shaped us.
That's right. There's a
Yeah,
wonderful book. And now the name of it is escaping me, but this fellow went all over the world
Mm,
and looked at people who had exceeded,
yes.
beyond any expectation. In Brazil, the kids that played soccer and musicians, and every single one of them had a trusted advisor in some way, shape, form, or another. And I always say that good mental health, it's not a natural sport. It's a learned sport.
Nice way of putting it. Yeah.
And if we don't have somebody to teach us, then we go through life. Many times we figure it out as we age. But wow, if we could teach.
Yeah, what I'm hearing you say too, Tina, is, that advocate, right? At different ages, that person who's not only got our back, but knowing they have enough wisdom because either their age or they just have wisdom to help us along the way, even when we're not ready.
Right. Because, as you said, how long did it take you to recognize, well, maybe I'm not doing this, or maybe I'm not paying attention?
A while.
Right? So again, I'm a huge advocate of teaching these skills. This is not a natural sport.
Yeah, it's what you do. Yeah.
It is what you do. So I'm kind of on the bandwagon for that. And for those aspiring leaders,
Yes.
to really appreciate somebody with your expertise and your awareness and which is why I invited you on the show, and your willingness to show, we call them vulnerabilities, but they're really your strength.
Yeah. Well, I think too, I think certain humans can elicit this from us. And there's always that safety. And I think when we have somebody that can truly look at us and listen, because my mom did, at paying attention, she really truly listened, right? And how many people do we meet in our life that are actively present for us on a regular basis, let alone here and there? It's, so I think I bring up that example in Getting Off the Treadmill. Book I wrote was about, young children, they live in this state of flow, right? They lose track of time. And we don't. We get corrupted. And we now have this, and young people, I don't know, I certainly would be really hard to raise kids in this day and age if, that this is what they know. I mean, it's a great tool, don't get me wrong. And because my follow through is pretty low, I love this system of reminders and putting things in, but it's also just a tool, and I get obsessed with it.
I know.
Wait a minute, when was the last time I turned this off?
So we could go on and on. I have questions here that I haven't asked, but I think the things that you have shared have been so incredibly valuable.
Oh, you're kind. Thank you.
We're in alignment with the message that we're getting out.
Well, you're doing great work too. And I, we've talked about the Vistage and so forth. And I think, leaders have to have this learning skill sets and be willing to, whether we call it EQ or whatever it might be, because if there's that whole other side. And when we talk about really what we mostly talk about in peer groups and a lot with the challenges for EOS is people. That's right. And then how much is it us as the leader, and how much is it them, and how much have we given them to set them up for success? Absolutely.
Yeah. And on that note,
yes,
I want to tell you a little bit more, because I want to share this too. Yes. Mastering Under Pressure is who is sponsoring this Under the Hood. And it is a program to actually look at all the things that we're talking about. And so that you become acutely aware of this internal mechanism instrument, because a fine-tuned instrument, that's what a great athlete, a great performer, a great leader is, has access to all parts of us, with our head and our heart, and that they work together. Yeah. Sometimes we have to go with our heads, logic, and other times, oh no, I need to pay attention to what's going here. And so I have a quiz that Chilo is going to put on the notes. It's masteryunderpressure.net, where you can go and see where you are on a peak performance level.
Nice.
Talked about flow. This is, people think that flow is something that is a hit or miss. It actually is not. There are chemicals and neurochemicals that go off when we do certain parts of our jobs.
Yes.
Sometimes we need to be highly focused. Sometimes we need to just be out there going la la la. That's great.
Right. Right.
So, Mike, thank you so much for being my guest. And again, we're going to put in the notes where people can get in touch with you.
Well,
And-
my pleasure. And the only thing I want to say is thank you, Adriano Pedrelli, for introducing me to you. I look forward to continuing conversations and staying connected and helping one another.
Thank you so much.
Thanks, Tina. Bye-bye.
Right. Bye now.